Hello and welcome to Quiz Class. Today we have 100 questions on United States history. Here are our Quiz Class awards. Take a look at these and let us know how you rank in the comments at the end. So let's begin with question number 1. Who was the fourth president of the United States? James Monroe, Thomas Jefferson, or James Madison? James Madison. In which year did the Louisiana Purchase take place? 1803, 1802, or 1804? 1803. Who was the president during the War of 1812? Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, or James Madison? James Madison. Which event marked the start of the Mexican-American War? The Battle of the Alamo, the annexation of Texas, or the Mexican attack on American troops? The Mexican attack on American troops. What was the main goal of the Lewis and Clark expedition? To map a route to the Pacific Ocean, to explore the Gulf of Mexico, or to find gold? To map a route to the Pacific Ocean. Which amendment ratified in 1865 abolished slavery? The 15th, the 13th, or the 14th? The 13th Amendment. Who was the president of the Confederate States during the Civil War? Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, or Jefferson Davis? Jefferson Davis. Which Supreme Court case established the principle of judicial review? Brown versus Board of Education, Dred Scott versus Sanford, or Marbury versus Madison? Marbury versus Madison. What was the name of the purchase that added land from Mexico to the United States in 1853? The Oregon Trail, the Gadsden Purchase, or the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo? The Gadsden Purchase. Which state was the first to secede from the Union? South Carolina, North Carolina, or Virginia? South Carolina. Which famous speech did Abraham Lincoln deliver at the Gettysburg Battlefield in 1863? The Emancipation Proclamation, the House Divided Speech, or the Gettysburg Address? The Gettysburg Address. Which territory was acquired by the United States from Russia in 1867? Guam, Hawaii, or Alaska? Alaska. What was the name of the first successful steamboat which made its maiden voyage in 1807? The Clermont, the Horizon, or the Louisiana? The Clermont. Which war was fought between the U.S. and Great Britain from 1812 to 1815? The Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, or the War of 1812? The War of 1812. Who was the 16th President of the United States? Ulysses S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln, or Andrew Johnson? Abraham Lincoln. What was the main purpose of the Homestead Act of 1862? To grant land to settlers, to build railroads, or to grant... Yes, those are the two options. To grant land to settlers or to build railroads. To grant land to settlers. Which act passed in 1830 led to the forced relocation of Native American tribes? The Trail of Tears, the Dawes, or the Indian Removal Act? The Indian Removal Act. What was the primary goal of the Missouri Compromise of 1820? To establish new territories, to balance the number of free and slave states, or to regulate trade? To balance the number of free and slave states. Which American inventor is credited with the invention of the telegraph in the 1830s? Samuel Morse, Thomas Edison, or Eli Whitney? Samuel Morse. Which state was the last to join the Union during the 1800s? Oregon, California, or Utah? Utah. What was the main focus of the temperance movement in the 19th century? The prohibition of alcohol or labor rights? The prohibition of alcohol. Which famous pioneer trail was used by settlers moving west in the 19th century? The Mormon Trail, the Oregon Trail, or the Santa Fe Trail? The Oregon Trail. What was the primary purpose of the Erie Canal, completed in 1825? To facilitate westward expansion, to connect the Great Lakes with the Atlantic Ocean, or to promote trade with Europe? To connect the Great Lakes with the Atlantic Ocean. Which battle is considered the turning point of the Civil War? The Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Fort Sumter, or the Battle of Antietam? The Battle of Gettysburg. Who was the first woman to run for the President of the United States? Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, or Victoria Woodhull? Victoria Woodhull. What was the primary objective of the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848? To advocate for women's rights, to address labor issues, or to promote abolitionism? To advocate for women's rights. Which U.S. president signed the Indian Removal Act into law? James K. Polk, Martin Van Buren, or Andrew Jackson? Andrew Jackson. What was the main cause of the Civil War? Trade disputes, territorial expansion, or slavery? Slavery. Which state was the first to grant women the right to vote? Wyoming, California, or Oregon? Wyoming. Who was the Union general known for his march to the sea? Robert E. Lee, George McClellan, or William Tecumseh Sherman? William Tecumseh Sherman. Which president is associated with the corrupt bargain of 1824? John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, yes, or those two. John Quincy Adams or Andrew Jackson? That would be John Quincy Adams. What major event happened in 1849 that attracted thousands to California? The start of the Civil War, the discovery of gold, or the discovery of silver? The discovery of gold. Which president was responsible for the Trail of Tears? James K. Polk, Andrew Jackson, or Martin Van Buren? Andrew Jackson. Who authored the influential abolitionist novel Uncle Tom's Cabin? Harriet Beecher Stowe, William Lloyd Garrison, or Sojourner Truth? Harriet Beecher Stowe is the answer. Which battle was the first major battle of the Civil War? The Battle of Antietam, the Battle of Fort Sumter, or the Battle of Bull Run? The Battle of Fort Sumter. Which president is known for his New Deal programs aimed at combating the Great Depression? Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, or Franklin D. Roosevelt? Franklin D. Roosevelt. What was the main purpose of the Missouri Compromise? To resolve trade issues with Britain, to establish the first national bank, or to settle disputes over slavery in new territories? To settle disputes over slavery in new territories. Which U.S. president was known for his era of good feelings? John Adams, Andrew Jackson, or James Monroe? James Monroe. What was the primary goal of the Lewis and Clark expedition? To colonize new lands, to find a route to Asia, or to map the newly acquired Louisiana Territory? To map the newly acquired Louisiana Territory. Which state was purchased from Russia in 1867? Alaska, Oregon, or Hawaii? Alaska, that was a freebie. Who led the American forces at the Battle of New Orleans? Andrew Jackson, Zachary Taylor, or William Henry Harrison? Andrew Jackson. What was the main topic of the 1857 Dred Scott decision? Native American land rights, slavery and citizenship, or state versus federal rights? Slavery and citizenship. Which legislation required that escaped slaves be returned to their owners? The Compromise of 1850, the Missouri Compromise, or the Fugitive Slave Act? The Fugitive Slave Act. Which war resulted in the U.S. acquiring the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico? The Civil War, the Spanish-American War, or the Mexican-American War? The Spanish-American War. Who was the first U.S. Secretary of the Treasury? James Madison, John Adams, or Alexander Hamilton? Alexander Hamilton. Which 19th century movement aimed at providing educational and social services to poor neighborhoods? The abolitionist movement, the progressive movement, or the settlement house movement? The settlement house movement. What was the main focus of the Whig Party in the 1800s? To advance abolitionism, to support a strong federal government, or to promote states' rights? To support a strong federal government. Which U.S. president is known for his role in the annexation of Texas? John Tyler, Martin Van Buren, or James K. Polk? John Tyler. What was the primary purpose of the Gadsden Purchase? To acquire land for a transcontinental railroad, to gain access to gold mines, or to purchase land for settlement? To acquire land for a transcontinental railroad. Which 19th century U.S. president was a former general in the Mexican-American War? Andrew Jackson, Zachary Taylor, or Ulysses S. Grant? Zachary Taylor. Who was the president of the United States at the start of World War I? Franklin D. Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, or Woodrow Wilson? Woodrow Wilson. In which year did the stock market crash leading to the Great Depression? 1929, 1921, or 1923? 1929. Which U.S. president is known for the New Deal programs? John F. Kennedy, Harry S. Truman, or Franklin D. Roosevelt? Franklin D. Roosevelt. Which landmark legislation was passed in 1964 to end segregation and discrimination? The Civil Rights Act, the Social Security Act, or the Voting Rights Act? The Civil Rights Act. What was the name of the U.S. space mission that first landed humans on the moon? Apollo 12, Apollo 10, or Apollo 11? Apollo 11. Which U.S. president served during the Cuban Missile Crisis? John F. Kennedy, Lyndon B. Johnson, or Richard Nixon? John F. Kennedy. Which event marked the end of the Cold War? The Vietnam War's end, the fall of the Berlin Wall, or the Korean War armistice? The fall of the Berlin Wall. Who was the first woman to serve on the U.S. Supreme Court? Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Elena Kagan, or Sandra Day O'Connor? Sandra Day O'Connor. Which U.S. president is associated with the Great Society programs? Lyndon B. Johnson, Gerald Ford, or Richard Nixon? Lyndon B. Johnson. We are at question 60. What was the name of the U.S. military operation that aimed to liberate Kuwait from Iraqi occupation in 1991? Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Desert Storm. Yes, it's those two options. Operation Desert Storm. Who was the first African American to serve as a U.S. Supreme Court Justice? Thurgood Marshall or William H. Hastie? Thurgood Marshall. Which U.S. president is known for his policy of entente with the Soviet Union? Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, or Jimmy Carter? Richard Nixon. In which year was the first Earth Day celebrated? 1970, 1971, or 1972? (1970). Which event in 1993 led to the creation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA? The signing of the Dayton Accords, the signing of the North American Free Trade Agreement, or the signing of the Oslo Accords? The North American Free Trade Agreement signing. Which U.S. president was impeached but acquitted in the Senate in 1999? Bill Clinton, Andrew Johnson, or Richard Nixon? Bill Clinton. Which American civil rights leader delivered the famous "I Have a Dream" speech in 1963? Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, or Martin Luther King Jr.? Martin Luther King Jr. What was the name of the U.S. operation that aimed to capture or kill Osama bin Laden in 2011? Operation Neptune Spear, Operation Iraqi Freedom, or Operation Desert Storm? Neptune Spear. Which 1990s scandal involved a U.S. president and a White House intern? The Lewinsky scandal, Teapot Dome scandal, or Watergate? The Lewinsky scandal. Which U.S. president signed the Affordable Care Act into law in 2010? Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, or George W. Bush? Barack Obama. Which 20th century American author wrote The Great Gatsby? F. Scott Fitzgerald, John Steinbeck, or William Faulkner? F. Scott Fitzgerald. Which U.S. president was in office during the end of World War II? Dwight D. Eisenhower, Harry S. Truman? Harry S. Truman. What was the name of the first artificial Earth satellite launched by the Soviet Union in 1957? Sputnik 1, Sputnik 2, or Sputnik 3? Sputnik 1. Which U.S. president authorized the use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? Lyndon B. Johnson, Harry Truman, or Dwight D. Eisenhower? Harry S. Truman. Which 20th century movement aimed at ending racial segregation and discrimination against African Americans? The Civil Rights Movement, the Labor Movement, or the Women's Rights Movement? The Civil Rights Movement. What was the primary focus of the 1970s Watergate scandal? Presidential misconduct and cover-up, the Cuban Missile Crisis, or the Iranian Revolution? Presidential misconduct and cover-up. Which American landmark was completed in 1931 and became the tallest building in the world at that time? The Empire State Building, the Sears Tower, or the Chrysler Building? The Empire State Building. Which U.S. president is associated with the Square Deal policies? William Howard Taft, Theodore Roosevelt, or Woodrow Wilson? Theodore Roosevelt. In which year was the Social Security Act passed? 1935, 1933, or 1930? (1935). What was the main focus of the Progressive Era reforms? Social justice and government regulation, foreign policy, or civil rights? Foreign policy. Question 80. Which U.S. president oversaw the end of the Cold War? Bill Clinton, Ronald Reagan, or George H.W. Bush? George H.W. Bush. Which U.S. president declared war on Japan after the attack on Pearl Harbor? Franklin D. Roosevelt, Harry Truman, or Herbert Hoover? Franklin D. Roosevelt. What was the main purpose of the Marshall Plan? To establish NATO, to rebuild and aid Europe after World War II, or to develop the atomic bomb? To rebuild and aid Europe after World War II. Which American aviator completed the first solo nonstop transatlantic flight in 1927? Charles Lindbergh, Wiley Post, or Howard Hughes? Charles Lindbergh. What was the main focus of the EPA, established in 1970? To protect human health and the environment, to manage national parks? Yes, it would be those two. To protect human health and the environment. Which event is considered the start of the American Civil Rights Act or movement? The March on Washington, the Montgomery bus boycott, or the Civil Rights Act of 1964? The Montgomery bus boycott. Which U.S. president was assassinated in 1963? John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., or Robert F. Kennedy? John F. Kennedy. What was the goal of the Manhattan Project? To build the first atomic bomb, to develop the first jet engine, or to establish a secret intelligence agency? To build the first atomic bomb. Which U.S. president signed the Interstate Highway Act into law in 1957? John F. Kennedy, Dwight D. Eisenhower, or Lyndon B. Johnson? Dwight D. Eisenhower. Which Supreme Court case declared school segregation unconstitutional? Roe v. Wade, Brown versus the Board of Education, or Miranda versus Arizona? Brown versus the Board of Education. Which event in 1969 is considered a major milestone in the gay rights movement in the U.S.? The Stonewall riots, the passing of the Defense of Marriage Act, or the Harvey Milk assassination? The Stonewall riots. Who was the first American woman to travel into space? Judith Resnick, Sally Ride, or Kathryn Sullivan? Sally Ride. Which 1972 scandal led to the resignation of President Richard Nixon? The Teapot Dome scandal, Watergate, or the Iran-Contra affair? Watergate. Which U.S. president signed the Americans with Disabilities Act into law in 1990? George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, or Jimmy Carter? George H.W. Bush. Who was the first president of the United States to visit China? Gerald Ford, Lyndon B. Johnson, or Richard Nixon? Richard Nixon. What was the main focus of the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom? To demand civil and economic rights for African Americans, to advocate for women's suffrage, or to support environmental protection? To demand civil and economic rights for African Americans. Which 1995 event was a domestic terrorist attack in the U.S.? The Oklahoma City bombing, the Boston Marathon bombing, or the Columbine High School shooting? The Oklahoma City bombing. Which U.S. president signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 into law? Richard Nixon, Lyndon B. Johnson, or John F. Kennedy? Lyndon B. Johnson. Which American labor leader co-founded the United Farm Workers in 1962? Eugene V. Debs, Cesar Chavez, or Samuel Gompers? Cesar Chavez. Which event in 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war? The Cuban Missile Crisis, the Vietnam War, or the Korean War? The Cuban Missile Crisis. Which Supreme Court decision in 1973 legalized abortion in the United States? Planned Parenthood versus Casey, Planned Parenthood versus Wade, or Roe v. Wade? Roe v. Wade. And for our bonus question, which president signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965? Let us know the answer in the comments, and of course, how you ranked with our quiz class awards. And here they are. Thanks for playing this quiz. Don't forget to hit that like button, and we will see you in our next one. Bye-bye.